Today I'm continuing on the theme of Operation Market Garden. After all, 80 years ago this week, the battle was still furiously raging in occupied Holland. First, for those of you who aren't aware, Operation Market Garden was Field Marshal Montgomery's audacious plan to end the Second World War by Christmas 1944. The plan involved dropping 3 Allied airborne divisions, 2 American, the 101st and 82nd, and 1 British, the 1st Airborne Division, with Polish paratroopers attached, deep into German-occupied Holland. These units would capture a series of bridges, so that 30 Corps, a British armoured unit, could push up into Germany, opening up a new front and hopefully ending the war. But in today's video, I'll mainly be focusing on one man, a man whose heroism and bravery saw him awarded Britain's highest medal for gallantry in the face of the enemy, the Victoria Cross. John Grayburn was born in Karachi, India in January 1920. His father Lionel served during the Boer War and worked for a bank in India during John's younger years. But due to his father's ill health, the family moved to Dorset, back in England. John was not an academic student during his school years, but he excelled in sports, particularly in rugby, and he was also a skilled boxer. When the Second World War began, Europe was plunged into war for the second time in just 20 years. John enlisted in the army and was commissioned into the Ox and Bucks Light Infantry. In 1942, he was promoted to lieutenant. That same year, he married his wife, Marcel Chambers, with whom he had one son, who was born in that same year. During these years of the war, Grayburn became disinterested with the Ox and Bucks. The unit remained on the home front, so he volunteered for the newly established Parachute Regiment. In 1943, after completing his training, he was sent to the 2nd Battalion, the 1st Airborne Division, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel John Frost. Grayburn took command of the 2nd Platoon of A Company. When Operation Market Garden was given the green light for September 1944, the 1st Airborne was given the task of taking the furthest bridge in the city of Arnhem. On the 17th of September 1944, the operation began, and over 1,000 Allied aircraft and hundreds of gliders filled with troops and equipment took to the skies to begin the operation. The 2nd Battalion numbered around 800 men. They landed with the bulk of the British airborne on day 1 of the operation, and unlike many of their counterparts, they immediately headed for their objective at Arnhem Bridge. They did manage to bypass the majority of the Germans in the area after a few small skirmishes. They, however, were hampered by the locals, who came out in large numbers to cheer and celebrate their perceived liberation from the Germans. A Company of the 2nd Battalion were some of the first men to reach the northern end of Arnhem Bridge. They immediately set up in the houses and awaited the rest of 2nd Battalion's arrival. During this time, German infantry and vehicles continued to drive over the bridge. The British Paras, however, held their fire, not wishing to advertise their presence as their force was still relatively small, and at this stage, remaining undetected was more important than starting a fight that could have saw the Paras overwhelmed early on. A short while later, the rest of 2nd Battalion arrived, and its commander, John Frost, sent a small force to test the Germans at the southern end of the bridge. This attack, however, was repulsed, and as night fell on the first day, Grayburn's platoon was then tasked with preparing a larger assault. The men blackened their faces and tore up strips of curtains to wrap around their boots to muffle the sound as they crossed the bridge. The platoon moved forward, but was spotted and a firefight broke out that saw Lieutenant Grayburn become wounded, having been shot in the shoulder. Despite this, he pressed onwards with his platoon. Eventually, however, they were forced to withdraw due to overwhelming enemy fire. Over the next few days, the men of the 2nd Battalion came under increasingly heavy German attacks. Grayburn's platoon were tasked with defending one of the houses on the eastern side of the British perimeter. The Germans attacked the house with infantry, mortars, artillery, as well as with tanks and self-propelled guns. The men held firm against these attacks under the brave leadership of John Grayburn, who constantly exposed himself to enemy fire to issue orders and check on the men around the house. On the 19th of September, Grayburn took command of what was left of A Company, as its commander, Major Digby Tatum Water, took a higher command within the battalion. Grayburn took what remained of the company and reorganised them into fighting patrols. He ordered the men to aggressively attack the Germans. These patrols pushed the Germans out of nearby buildings and forced them to commit more armoured vehicles to combat the aggressive tactics of the paratroopers. Despite this, the 2nd Battalion was too few in number, and the Germans squeezed their position tighter and tighter. The Germans then began to lay explosives at the ramp of the bridge. Seeing this, John Grayburn led a patrol that forced the Germans to withdraw. Attached members of the Royal Engineers defused the explosives. During the fighting, Grayburn was wounded once again, but returned to the fight quickly. In the chaos, a German armoured vehicle came forwards towards Grayburn's position. He gave the order for his men to withdraw. He stood up in full view of the German tank and began directing his men back. The tank proceeded to fire its machine gun at Grayburn, killing him instantly. He was buried on the bridge embankment after the fighting, and his remains stayed there, buried until 1948. When they were rediscovered, he was reburied at the Arnhem War Cemetery. The commander of A Company, Major Tatum Water, escaped capture after the failure of the operation, and his after-action report led to Lieutenant John Grayburn being posthumously promoted to captain, and also saw him posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross for his incredible actions during the battle. His Victoria Cross currently sits in the Airborne Museum in Duxford. For more Arnhem/Market Garden content, head to the description below. I've linked all of my videos on the subject in that. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.